Okay, good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us here at this press conference with the Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel. We're delighted to have with us here today Ms. Navi Pillai, who's chaired the commission since it was first established by the Human Rights Council in 2021, and fellow Commissioner Chris Sidoti. Yesterday afternoon here in New York, Ms. Pillai presented the findings of the Commission's latest report to the General Assembly, and today she's here to talk to you about those findings and take your questions. So Ms. Pillai will start us off by giving us some brief opening remarks, and then we'll open the floor to questions. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for being here. I just saw green chairs. And I thought, well, why aren't we still in the news? Very much in the news. So, as Todd said, we delivered our report yesterday, and actually, it was refreshingly different from the last time when I thought we had been subjected to abuse and acted further on that. So it was a much more respectful process, which is what a Commission of Inquiry should expect. As you know, our report that we delivered yesterday was already finalized, but we dropped everything, and our team definitely, worked around the clock to follow the events from the 7th October. So it's very important that we have this extended mandate to conduct investigations. Chris will tell you more about what we did in those few days, but because items of information appeared on social media and quickly disappeared. So our team was able to capture those items and save them. So they're there for people to access for verification. 2 days after the 7th, we then issued our statement condemning the attack, calling for cessation of hostilities, and demanding the return of hostages. So we made our position very clear, and I reiterated this in our report yesterday. I found that very many member states were still had prepared their responses on the basis of our report, and there were one or two complaints that we were not critical of Hamas. Well, we named them in our press statement, and I named them in our introductory remarks. So we do condemn that, but we also equally unequivocally condemn Israeli military attacks that result inevitably in the deaths of thousands of Palestinian civilians. I was going to say including hundreds of children, but last night I heard the figure was almost 2,300 children in Gaza. And because of this continuing mandate of ours, we are in a position to examine issues such as the right of defense. And as we see played out here, it's much more retaliation and revenge. But what is the end goal? What can they seek to achieve by this? These are all ongoing issues we will be addressing. But the principal point we made is that there are clear indications that international crimes have been committed. So accordingly, in line with our mandate, we began collecting evidence of war crimes committed by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups and by Israeli security forces. And we issued a call for submissions last week. I also am very pleased that because of our mandate to investigate matters, we investigated the unlawful killing of journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, and I did note there wasn't a single reference to that part of our report, and in other words, no challenge to the facts and results that we produced. And the results were that using forensic data and experts, we were able to identify and name the military unit from whose group this bullet was fired, and we have the name of the commander of that unit. We didn't name the commander, but we have that information. Our mandate is to pass the information on to a judicial institution. It could be a national prosecuting authority or the International Criminal Court. Yesterday we met the family of Shireen, and I'm very pleased to tell you all that her cousin is here, Nazreen. So we had a good meeting and understanding of how the family is, in fact, seeking justice and accountability, which is the principal mandate of our commission. And of course, I assure you that we intend to continue pursuing the fulfillment of our mandate, including in relation to making recommendations, in particular on accountability measures, with a view to avoiding and ending impunity and ensuring legal accountability, including individual, criminal, and command responsibility. And finally, to say again and again and again, we make these requests to Israel for access so that we can enter Israel and speak to Israeli victims. The more we hear of their suffering, we felt it's only fair that we speak to them and record their testimony as well. So we don't as much as receive a response to these requests. We'll continue to pursue them. So Todd, if it's okay, I just want to see if Chris has any opening remarks. All right, then.
Of course.
Then we're back with you here.
Okay, thank you, Navi. Now we open the floor to questions. If you could just please identify yourself, media outlet you work for. We'll start here.
Thank you so much. Sherman Bryce-Pease, South African Broadcasting, and on behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, we are delighted that you've come to talk with us. Commissioner Pillai, maybe if you could expand on this notion. You mentioned the right to self-defense, but you said this was more retaliation. Can you talk a bit about your understanding of Israel's right to self-defense here in this instance and what you are seeing play itself out on the ground in Gaza? And then secondly, what does accountability look like? You mentioned accountability. There are widespread violations of international humanitarian law that have happened here on both sides. What does accountability look like in this instance?
So international law clearly has the parameters to what is self-defense. Chris will give you the language of it. He's such an authority on the law, the actual language. But I think really everybody understands what self-defense and where the boundaries lie. So immediately, if you're under attack, and you can resort to protection. We're seeing now where there is no direct threat to individuals from Israel. The campaign has gone on, and many speeches. The speeches are important coming from politicians because that's where we look for the intent and the plan. And this is what I did in the tribunals I sat on, the Rwanda Tribunal and the International Criminal Court, is how do you establish the intent? And it's usually in the speeches and policies and plans of governments. We're going to be doing the same here. The speeches then indicate to us that this is much more activity with the intent of pursuing collective punishment on Gaza and all Palestinians. A very frightening juxtaposition of Hamas as all the people of Gaza. And what that means is frightening. Can they then kill children, just civilians? There is no justification in international law for that kind of situation. International law has clear obligations on every state, whether they're exercising self-defense or hostile warfare, to protect civilians. And I fear that this is not happening. Civilians are being targeted, and civilian objects, structures are being damaged irreparably. So it's a huge concern, and we are going to be looking into this, expanding on this in our continuing work. Accountability, what it looks like is, I think it's very, very important that this is the only commission that has multiple tasks and mandates assigned to it. And one of the mandate is to pursue justice and accountability. That's why we have an investigation mandate. We have a mandate requiring us to work closely with judicial institutions, a mandate to identify the key perpetrators, the individuals responsible. That has not been the regular feature of commissions so far. It's been very limiting. We intend to take full advantage of this scope that we have in order to prepare, at least, to ensure that there is justice and accountability. And as I said, again and again, that is the voice on the street. These terrible things have happened. Where's the justice? So I hope I've addressed your question, Sherwin.
Mr. Sidoti, if you could,
Thanks. The states have not just the right, but the obligation to defend or protect their citizens. And to me, that's the appropriate legal starting point, that there is an obligation to protect the citizens of the state. One difficulty that it seems is not being properly addressed in discussing the right to self-defence in those terms under Article 51 of the UN Charter is that that's predominantly framed in terms of an attack by another state upon the first state and defending against state action. So one of the bitter ironies in the current situation is that although the United Nations General Assembly has admitted Palestine as an observer state, the State of Israel does not recognise Palestine as a state, and so it may be for that reason that the State of Israel cannot claim to act under Article 51 when it is being attacked not by a state but by a non-state actor. So in many respects that doesn't get us very far in talking about the right to self-defence in Article 51. The important legal point is that there is an obligation to defend citizens, and within the context of Gaza in particular and the State of Israel, the law of armed conflict applies. There was discussion in the ICJ advisory opinion on the wall in 2004 in which the ICJ addressed not the situation of Gaza but the situation of the West Bank, and said that the right to self-defence did not arise there because the West Bank was under tight Israeli occupation and it could not be considered as being an attack by either a non-state actor as an armed group or by another state. But I don't think that there is any doubt, there certainly is no doubt in my mind, that so far as Gaza is concerned, the law of armed conflict applies. That does mean that the State of Israel has the obligation to defend its citizens, but it means that that must be done in accordance with international law and the principles of necessity, reasonableness, proportionality, discrimination, precaution, and so forth. And it's those principles and the observance of those principles that becomes the critical question. And that's the question that we are going to have to examine in the investigation that, as our chair has indicated, we've already announced. There are very important legal points to be considered here. There is no doubt at all that what occurred on the 7th of October constituted war crimes. And I say that having already indicated that the law of armed conflict applied. What happened on the 7th of October in the targeting of civilians, the killing of civilians, the taking of civilians hostages, constituted war crimes. The questions more broadly, though, are why did it happen? How did it happen? What actually happened? As investigators, we have to approach investigation from a starting point of scepticism, of not just accepting assertions by any party, but undertaking an investigation and an examination, finding facts and applying law. And that's the job that we're assigned to do over the next 6 months.
if I could briefly follow up.
Sure.
So you say you see war crimes perpetrated by Hamas. Do you see war crimes being perpetrated by the Israeli state?
We've not yet done the investigation to be able to definitively say that at this point, but I would make one general comment. It's difficult to understand how international law can be observed in the current circumstances when we look at the extent of the destruction and the toll of civilian casualties. Is it possible to conduct the kind of military operation that Israel is conducting in Gaza and still comply with international law? That is a live question. We don't have conclusions, we need to investigate. But that is really the fundamental question that confronts the international system at the moment. Israel has an obligation to defend its citizens, no doubt about that. But is it possible to do that in the way in which it is being done and still comply with international law? That's the question.
Okay, Edie from Associated Press.
Thank you very much, Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. Ms. Pillai, especially nice to see you back here. How do you go about doing this determination of whether what Israel is doing now does in fact constitute war crimes? And you may be interested in the many speeches at the Security Council. Yesterday, there was at least one country that not only talked about war crimes, but claimed that Israel is guilty of genocide. So how are you going to go about making this determination? How long will it take? When might we see results?
We also have to address occupation. Yeah. Now, just reminding Chris there are also obligations on the part of occupying power, so international law and occupying power, and their responsibility to protect. And thank you, Edith. Equally, it's wonderful to see you after many years. We're still going on and on, yeah. Yes, yeah. So look, at the moment, what we have is a mandate. So it's a UN mandate. The investigation we did in respect of Shireen's death is now a UN investigation. We're going to use this and do what we can, as all commissions who are not allowed into Israel by Israel, not allowed into Palestine or Gaza, West Bank, and so on. We work from the outside. Syria Commission has been able to do that for many years, gathering evidence. So we will do that and also insist on going in because we have to speak to victims and also carry out forensic investigations and so on. That's what we intend to do. So we don't assign responsibilities until we have the evidence, very much like as I would do as a judge. So I think I'm right on how we plan to do this, because, yeah.
Yeah, I might just add a little bit. As our chair has indicated, commissions of inquiry generally do not have access to the countries in which they're under investigation. I don't know why it is that countries being investigated don't like to cooperate with United Nations mechanisms. It seems strange. The only one that does have access is Ukraine, and it helps them enormously. So we're used to collecting evidence from afar, and already from the time that the operation began on the 7th of October, we have been collecting an enormous quantity of digital evidence that we haven't even started analysing. So there is digital evidence. We can conduct interviews remotely. We can talk to people who come to appear before us in public hearings outside the area. We've been doing this now for the last 2 years and will continue. But I do re-emphasise what the chair said. You know, I referred to before to bitter ironies. Another bitter irony is that if we are impeded in our capacity to have access to the ground and to go there and interview witnesses, it will be the stories of Israelis that predominantly we are prevented from hearing. So it makes no sense whatsoever for anybody who is interested in truth, and I'm assuming that Hamas and the government of Israel and the PLO are interested in truth. Anybody who is interested in truth will enable us to have direct access to witnesses. It's as simple as that.
And any idea how long, when we might see some result? We're talking about a year, 6 months?
Not before June. We report to the Human Rights Council in June, and we will report at that point as much as we can. But given the enormity of what has happened, I can anticipate it will take us longer than that. But you know, we will at least be doing what we can by June.
And so far, we were able to collect evidence for the preparation of the 3 reports we've delivered already. I'm rather pleased with the last one that we delivered before the GA. Our recommendations of referral to the ICJ was adopted by a majority of states. Now, in order to get there, we held many oral hearings. We brought out people from Israel, from Palestine, and we heard public hearings. We held public hearings in Geneva, in Jordan. And just seeing people come out of those areas tells you what they want. They really want to see justice happen, and some of them need protection. We can't reveal their identities. We're taking all those precautions. And so I have every confidence that if we continue to make those opportunities available, we will have people from the inside wanting to share their experience with us. So give us time, but at least by June will be our next report.
Thank you, Navi. Okay, Al Jazeera.
Thank you, Ms. Pillai. You mentioned that in terms of the current ongoing conflict in the middle, in Gaza in particular, that you're collecting evidence, as you said, but you also said that you issued a call for submissions last week. Can you explain what kind of submissions are, you're looking for, as well as who can make submissions, and if so, how many submissions you've received at the moment?
Really, I should get my team to see what the language of what we put in there. Sometimes they do that without accountability to the chair. So nothing specific, am I right, Seppi? Yes. Yeah, all right, let him tell us. Oh, all right. Why are you keeping quiet? Yeah.
It's a general call for submissions for anyone who has any evidence whatsoever, including eyewitness evidence, but also documentary, video, digital of any kind, who was interested. So firstly, primary witnesses and primary evidence. Second, secondary expertise, I guess you could call it. Analysis of what has happened, why it has happened. Submissions can be made in any form. It's not like a court in that sense, so that they can do it online, they could do it by hard copy, and we also have opportunities to do it orally as well. So it's really very open, the methodology, and we want to hear from people. We do want, I emphasise, as much first-hand hard evidence as possible, which means, as I indicated, eyewitness accounts or digital material or whatever, as much of that as we possibly can get. And there's no time limit, it's an open call.
And I would say that people are very keen to have their words recorded on the UN website. That's where it goes, except where we have to protect identities. The idea of protecting identities also is an incentive for people to come to us, and they do. And our mandate allows us to share the information with the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and any other court that approaches us. So it's a very live process. We don't just collect and keep. We can act on it.
Can I just ask a follow-up? Have you had any submissions on the current escalation in Gaza? Do you know how many?
I don't know how many we have received.
We've been busy here.
Okay, thank you. We'll take another question from the front row.
Thanks so much. Ephraim Kusaifi from Arab News Daily. Anade asked my first question, but I have another one. Just to try to understand the difference here, you described the October 7 attack as unequivocally a war crime, and you gave us details on why. But Israel's what Israel is doing in Gaza, you said we need investigation before we can decide. What's the difference here? Why are there two different mechanisms to define? What's the difference between the two? Why October 7 is unequivocally a war crime, but what's happening now needs to be investigated first?
The law that applies is exactly the same as the first thing I should say. So we're applying the same law. The difference is that the situations, the individual attacks on October the 7th were individualised, and so if you like, micro as against macro. It's much easier to determine even at this stage that civilians were killed, that civilians were targeted, and Hamas has said they did it. If Hamas hadn't said they did it, we would still have an open question about who was responsible. I have seen reports that there were Islamic Jihad fighters involved as well. I'm not aware of any acceptance of that by Islamic Jihad, so at that point I at least don't refer to Islamic Jihad participation, but it may be that that's the case, but I don't think we know that yet. But acting on the video evidence that we have received, the statements of some witnesses and victims, and the acknowledgement of responsibility by Hamas, I think we can say that those killings were war crimes, and the taking of civilian hostages is certainly also a war crime. But it's much easier to make that definitive call at this early point than it is to look at all of those other issues of legitimate military objective, necessity, reasonableness, proportionality, discrimination, precaution that applies to the kind of bombing campaign. But as I indicated, there is a major question that can you conduct such an intensive bombing campaign on a concentrated population area and still comply with the law of war? That's the question that I've got about that side of it.
Thank you so much. I also have one quick question. Also on the subject of studying intent in the speeches of leaders, I saw the leader of Hamas speak on Al Arabiya, and he was adamant about the fact that they don't seek to target civilians and that their only target are military targets. Have you seen evidence to otherwise? Have you studied also the intent in Hamas speeches? What can you tell us about that?
No, it's a working matter for us. As Chris said, we first took into account that they admitted their involvement. So intent, yeah, you just don't look at one leader's words or something. We study every one of them. And leaders often explain. I've come across this in my judicial career. And we do look at the explanations given by some of them, and it may well be a justification. So we can't rule on that now. We're looking at everything. And this call for submissions is also an invitation to alert us to statements that may have been made and that we missed.
Okay, thank you. Another question?
Thank you. Nabil Abisab, Al Arabi TV station. I will ask my follow-ups later, but Israel accuses Hamas that Hamas uses civilians as a humanitarian shield. And we see rockets sometimes launched from neighborhoods in Gaza, for example. But do you have evidence that Israel is also using civilians as a humanitarian shield? We see a heavy presence of military capabilities in the West Bank and the occupied Palestinian territory. And around Gaza, we saw in the media that there is a lot of military capabilities in the towns of Israel, close to Gaza. So do you have evidence on this point? Thank you.
Once again, it's a work in progress. So really, I have to say, I have not seen any definitive evidence that Israel is using civilians as human shields. Just from media reports, I think what is deeply concerning is that they appear to be mowing down civilians. And if you bomb indiscriminately, it's going to hit civilians. These are matters for concern. But I don't think we have established any clear evidence yet, but this is something, thank you for raising your question, this is something we will be watching out for. Thanks.
And to follow up on Shireen investigations, you said that the accountability can take place on the national level or in the ICC, if I'm not mistaken. Who decides where the accountability will be achieved and when?
All our lives, we wanted a mechanism where we can seek justice from the outside. I grew up in apartheid South Africa, and we had no remedies inside the country. So I really dreamt of somewhere you can access justice. And this is why I was happy to serve as a judge on the International Criminal Court. And that justice is necessarily slow. Most people are getting very impatient with how slow the ICC is, but that's all we have now. And we're working very closely with the prosecutor already. But secondly, individual states can exercise what we call universal jurisdiction. Either if their citizens are affected or if an international crime was committed in their area, one of the members can refer this, do something about it themselves. So that's why we're looking at national courts as well. You have heard of Belgium that has done several of these cases of Rwandan genocide there. I think if in the absence of access to the International Criminal Court, civil society in fact is looking to their national jurisdictions to fill in that gap.
Okay, thank you, Navi. We'll go to the back first.
Greetings, Evelyn Leopold.
Hey, Evelyn.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Excuse me. Have the rules of war been followed carefully anywhere? It just seems that once there is a war, it's pretty uncontrollable.
So as the Secretary General has been emphasizing as well, yeah, there are rules of war. You can't just practice, things don't break down during war. They do generally for you and me and all of us, but when it comes to rules of war, they still apply. They were established at the Nuremberg military tribunals. I just come from there. I was there last week. I'm the president of the Advisory Council of the Nuremberg Principles Academy. We have our meetings in courtroom 600 where the Nazis were tried. So it's all very real to me how these rules were established by the Allied forces here. But many of that have been incorporated in the UN declarations after that. So there must be compliance with these rules of war, and you can be charged for war crimes if you fail to adhere to these wars. And as Chris has given you all the various categories, so if you cannot, your primary obligation, for instance, is to protect civilians and not to kill civilians, not to damage civilian structures unless it fulfills the criteria of necessity or a military goal, a legitimate military goal. You want to add to that, Chris?
Look, the only thing I'd add is a sense of hopelessness. Regrettably, the rules of war have not acted to prevent war. The most that you can say is they have acted to mitigate the effects of war. And I'm not a historian, I'm not a military expert, but I take the intent of your question and just in saying, well, yeah, these rules are never observed. I would say, though, that the rules are observed a lot more than we may think, even though I agree with the implication that you state that, to the best of my knowledge, any war involves violation of the rules of war. And, we have seen some states, including my own, grappling to come to terms with the commission of war crimes or potential commission of war crimes by national military heroes. So it's not a pretty picture. And the best that I can do in defence of the law of war is to say that it's a genuine attempt to mitigate the inevitable destructiveness of violence.
I must say that I've been associating with civil society and discussions on where we are going with these rules of war and cyber warfare, unarmed drone attacks. Can we hold machines accountable? These are all new and emerging issues, and I'm very happy that civil society is always on the forefront of pushing for regulations. We have to have regulations in place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go to the third row, and then we'll go in the
Thank
back.
Hello, Jimmy Quinn with National Review. Thanks for being here today. So the Secretary General stirred up a bit of a conversation about his remarks yesterday about the current situation not occurring in a vacuum, or referring to the Hamas attacks. Is that also the Commission's assessment that October 7th didn't happen in a vacuum? What's your assessment of Hamas's motives?
Firstly, I think it's pretty dangerous that that level of freedom of speech is taken as anti-Israel. So the Secretary General, in my view, made a correct statement. Now, with us, just look at us. We come here before the GA, having prepared a thorough report on atrocities that have been committed. And then along comes September 7th. So the message is clear. We have all this verified evidence that the attack isn't an isolated incident. It flows from all these violations as well, on both sides, not just on the Israeli sides. And so I think we said so yesterday at the Assembly. Secretary General got into trouble for it, but nobody challenged our statement because there's our full report of what happened. I don't know what our cut-off date was for that report. August. Yeah, so until August we documented all these violations on both sides. And, I'm always saying, because of my past job, that human rights violations are alerts to worse things to come. So I very much support the Secretary's general statement, and I think we lent a factual basis for such a statement. Chris, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. The Secretary-General said these events did not occur in a vacuum, and the Israeli Foreign Minister rejected that. Does that mean the Israeli Foreign Minister is saying that these events did occur in a vacuum? I don't know. If he meant that, what was the intention? I would agree that they occurred in a vacuum of respect for the law, in a vacuum of respect for human beings, in a vacuum of inhumanity, in a vacuum of morality. Yeah, I agree with that. But there was a place and there was a time in which these events occurred, and we have to take account of the place and the time. I think that's what the Secretary-General was saying. It sounds fair enough to me.
Okay, thank you, Chris. In the back, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioners. I wanted to parse out a little bit more about the concept. Mike Wagenheim from I-24 News in Israel. Wanted to parse out a little bit more about the concept of self-defense and the obligation to defend your citizens in your eyes. The Secretary General often includes the statement where Israel needs to see its legitimate security needs materialize while the Palestinians need to see their rights upheld and a state established. Often lumps those two together. The Palestinian list is elongated, the Israeli list kind of stops there. Each maneuver, each procedure, each step Israel has taken to defend itself, whether it be a security barrier, whether it be checkpoints, whether it be the establishment of closed military zones in the desert, what have you, is pilloried by the UN at some level, whether it's a UN resolution, whether it's statements, whether it's included in the Special Envoy's report. So I'd like you to parse out a little bit, to what extent, even you, Commissioner Pillai, in a previous role, criticized the use of Iron Dome because Hamas didn't have the same usage. Where does self-defense start and where does it end as a responsibility for the Israeli side?
I remember this comment 10 years ago, I think, when I was High Commissioner. So it was a little child who told one of the High Commissioner's office colleagues, why can't we have iron domes to protect us from the rockets bombing from the other side? So it was this child's statement that I put out there. So I was asking for protection of civilians. And that is also, in my mind, the crux of what you do with self-defense. You know, how far do you go? When does it become aggressive? There may be all kinds of regulations, such as the roadblocks, searching. States are entitled to pass regulations. States are entitled to protect their own citizens. It's when it is excessive and violates the standards set by international law that we become critical. So it's not necessarily a long list drawn for Israel and a shorter list. That is not by design. We record what we have verified.
So, what measures has Israel taken to defend itself that the UN has not taken some action against? The security barrier to defend against nonstop suicide bombings wound up in a General Assembly resolution, wound up in the international court system, stopping suicide bombings. What could be done to stop Hamas that wouldn't be criticized by the United? Can you point out one example of some defensive maneuver that hasn't and wouldn't be criticized by the United Nations? I haven't found one yet.
I'm in no position to comment on every United Nations resolution, I'm afraid, but I will give you one example of, and I should have started by saying your question's fair enough. I agree with the legitimacy and the validity of the State of Israel having to ask that question. At the heart of the advisory opinion of the ICJ on the wall was not an opinion that the wall was unlawful. It was an opinion that said that building the wall on the eastern side of the Green Line, that is, on territory that was not part of the recognised territory of the State of Israel, was unlawful. So the answer to the question is contained in that case in the very decision of the very advisory opinion of the ICJ. If the wall had been built upon the internationally recognised border of the State of Israel, it would have been legitimate. And these are the issues that need to be addressed all the time. I think that there is too much broad sweeping generalisation from all sides in this dispute. Let's look at the facts and let's look at the law. I talk like a lawyer, and lawyers are inherently boring. But let's look at the facts and let's look at the law and say, how do we fit together? And I think that the ICJ, in fact, did a service. And we see the current reference to the ICJ, which we have recommended, as doing a service. I was absolutely gobsmacked when some of the objections to this referral being made was on the basis that it would hinder the peace process. Now, call me a boring old lawyer, but I would have thought that knowing what international law says helps a peace process. Is it seriously suggested that we can effect a peace settlement that does not meet the requirements of international law? Is that what's being suggested? It's nonsense. For me, the referral to the ICJ in this instance is to set a bottom line that will facilitate the peace process, because everybody will know what the law says. If the law can be criticised, It can be criticised on the basis that we don't understand its application because it's too vague or confusing. So you go to the most authoritative court in the international system and you get advice. Now, in that instance of the 2004 advisory decision, the court told Israel what it needed to do to comply with the law and take action which, within its legitimate discretion as a state, it was entitled to do. And the problem was it didn't do it properly. And that can be multiplied in other instances as well. But I take that because that's the one that, to me as a lawyer, is the most appealing, because I saw what the court did.
I do have a second question for you. In terms of your comment at the top here that you talked yesterday, and I think you said you had less abuse than when you were last at the UN. Why did you feel that the challenges to the Commission, the challenges to its very unique, unprecedented mandate were abusive in any way? And I believe Hungary, Micronesia, several other countries continued, as of yesterday, in their comments to you, to criticize the mandate. How was that any less or more abusive than before?
I think the criticism of the mandate is a legitimate activity. The mandate was not created by us, created by the member states. They voted on it. Majority supported it. The abuse comes in when it's directed personally at the commissioners, and that's what happened the last time. It didn't happen now.
Why do you feel that was?
What? Why it happened? Why it didn't happen now?
Why it happened the first time?
It shouldn't have.
That was my question. Why do you think it happened the first time?
In my view, it happened because people didn't read the report. They must read the report. Tell us what's wrong with the report, where we got the facts wrong, where we got the law wrong. It's not the first time that there's been these. I think every special rapporteur, every commissioner of commissions set up in relation to Israel have faced personal attacks. In this case, I came to the press conference here in October and complained about it and said, this is not right. You know, we are offering a service. We are not being remunerated for our services. As a mark of our independence, we're doing what is in the true spirit of the United Nations. If you're out there retired, come and do this. We need independent, impartial people to examine this. So it's not fair that we labeled ahead. So it's a labeling that I objected to. I'm very pleased that, yeah, you're right, apart from Micronesia and Hungary, there was the criticisms and comments were much more concrete. We appreciated that.
Thank you. I'm going to have to cut you off. We'll have to finish it after. We have. I just want to take one last question online. We're running out of time. Please go ahead.
Thank you. This is Abdul Hamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I have a few questions. Ms. Navaneetham Pillai, you are from South Africa. The people of South Africa has been struggling against apartheid. Did they use violence or not? Was anyone criticizing the legitimacy of the struggle of South African people against apartheid? That's one question. Why the Palestinians don't have the same right? Second, what is occupation legitimate or not? If it is illegitimate, and you know it is illegal occupation, how long the Palestinian gonna take this occupation and be quiet? And if every time they rise against occupation, then they are accused of committing terrorism. Another question related to this.
Okay, I think we should go ahead and take the question. Oh.
Can you justify the building settlement of the Palestinian in building expansion settlement? Put these questions together and answer me about the state of affairs of the Palestinians under occupation for 56 years and 16 years of siege of Gaza. Thank you.
Navi, before you, or Chris, before you begin, we just have a couple more minutes, so we have to wrap it up quickly.
President Nelson Mandela explained how difficult it was for him at a certain stage when they were being oppressed and had no leeway on why they adopted the policy of resorting to armed struggle. And he spelt that out as a legitimate means, but something that they didn't come to very easily. And clearly, it was one of the factors, the threat of armed struggle, that led the parties to mediate the end of apartheid. I can't compare that with Palestine, except the suffering here is so much worse, so much longer. But I think it's important to remember that Mandela did say it was as a last resort. Thank you.
As an individual, I'm a wishy-washy Western liberal Christian, and I condemn all violence under all circumstances. As a lawyer, I accept that the law permits violence under some circumstances, and provided that it is undertaken in accordance with the law and the principles I have mentioned. As a lawyer, that's what I seek to apply. The law that tries to restrict violence, to regulate the conduct of violence in a way that mitigates the harm caused to human beings. That's the state of the law, and that's the law that we seek to apply. Our Commission has already considered the issue of the lawfulness or otherwise of the occupation, and we said categorically in our report to the General Assembly last October, and we discussed it in this very room afterwards, that in our opinion, the conclusion as lawyers that we have formed is that the occupation is unlawful. And it was on that basis that we proposed the referral to the International Court of Justice so that the most authoritative court in the international system, not just us as a mere commission of inquiry, but the most authoritative court could give its opinion on that subject. And we are pleased the referral was made and look forward to receiving the opinion of the International Court of Justice.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I'm sorry to cut us off early. I think we could go on for quite some time, but we have another briefing coming up imminently. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for sharing your findings. Thank you.